Hello everyone, in this video I will be recapping the chapter 49 and 50 of the manhwa called Demonic Evolution. While Aang and Sidu Liu were walking, at first the warriors were surprised to see Aang, who possessed a quadruple finned core. But upon seeing Sidu Liu they began to mock her for being a single core warrior with only one fin. Everyone knew that they were heading towards the castle, so they mocked them by saying that they were here to provide more nutrients to the demons inside the castle. One of the warriors looked at his companion and asked if they were a lost couple. He started laughing and replied that they wouldn't be able to enter since they wouldn't even be capable of passing the strength test. Upon hearing this, Aang couldn't help but smile. While they were walking, he looked at the warriors and told Sidu Liu that the other warriors were looking at them with contempt. She simply stayed quiet and didn't say a single word. Several minutes later, once they had distanced themselves from the others, a warrior who was accompanied by another warrior, and a blonde woman who was the healer of the team. He caught both their attention and asked Aang if he was trying to copy him by bringing a girl along. Upon hearing this, Aang glanced back slightly and saw a tall warrior with an eye patch, another short red-haired warrior, and a blonde woman dressed as a nurse. The red-haired warrior mocked them, telling them that he never would have thought there would actually be a damn quadruple fin stupid enough to try to be so arrogant and powerful. He stared into their eyes and told them that if a four-finned warrior was bringing along a one-finned warrior to fight inside the castle, their heads would roll before they even realized it. He also called Aang trash. Upon hearing this, both of them turned around and Sidu Liu started looking at them with disdain, while Aang simply smiled and asked her not to bother responding since they didn't need to worry about such a low-level provocation. Among the multitude of warriors, several warriors began to whisper among themselves. Many of them recognized the red-haired warrior as young Master Other from the Mir family in the city of Eula. They had never thought that he would also come to the castle to try and snatch the integration core. The warrior standing behind Other was a six-winged elite warrior who had been hired by his family. He was on the list of mercenaries and was extremely strong, and currently was working for the Mir family. According to the warriors who had seen him, this elite warrior had an integration core and had managed to find an elemental power that suited him well. With his protection, people thought Other would be in charge of obtaining the integration core this time. The red-haired warrior extended his hands and introduced himself as Other from the ranked city called Eula. He also explained that he belonged to the Mir family, one of the best warrior families in the city of Eula. After introducing himself, he caught Sidu Liu's attention. She turned towards him and began wondering what this man wanted. Other advised her to listen to his advice. He explained that this place was not a place for fun. While touching the breasts of the blonde woman, he stared at Sidu Liu and asked if she had a green core. He closed his eyes, and while embracing the blonde woman with his left arm, he explained to Sidu Liu that he needed a personal healer to support him on his right side. Several seconds passed and not hearing a response from her, Other opened his eyes and started staring at them. At that moment, he saw Aang and Sidu Liu talking to each other and completely ignoring him. Upon seeing this, he couldn't help but get angry and asked her if she didn't recognize the name of the Mir family. He also added that he had spoken to her in a good manner because he thought she was a very beautiful girl. Upon hearing this, Sidu Liu became furious and asked him who gave him permission to talk to her. Upon hearing her words, both Other and the blonde woman were shocked as no one had ever spoken to them in this way before. Sidu Liu stared into his eyes with a disdainful look and called him a piece of trash for mentioning his family's reputation in every sentence. Upon hearing this, Other exploded in anger and threw the blonde woman to the ground. He assumed an offensive stance and, while staring into her eyes, asked her what she had just said. Then he revealed that he was capable of killing her with just a flick of his finger. Sidu Liu turned towards him, placed her backpack on the ground as she realized she would have to fight. She told Other that currently she wasn't as strong as him, but despite this, she wasn't someone who backed down. Deep down, she began to wonder how a perverted bastard dared to get angry. She was not willing to tolerate his behavior any longer and was ready to scold trash like him. She wasn't afraid and was prepared to beat him up. Other activated his core, and with a burst of momentum, he approached her in the blink of an eye. While his eyes were shining, he told her that a simple one-fin warrior had no chance against him. He began to reach out his hand towards her and prepared to attack, telling her that he was going to put her in her place. But just before he could strike, Aang activated his core and swiftly approached him. With a penetrating gaze fixed on Other, he grabbed his hand. Immediately, Other came to a sudden stop. While Aang held onto his hand, Other looked at him with a murderous glare and advised him to step aside or else he would destroy both of them. Aang addressed him as young Master Other of the Mir family and reminded him that he had been the first to provoke them, and also the one who had instigated this first fight. He revealed to him that if this came to light, then the reputation of the Mir family would be tarnished. He looked towards the castle entrance and explained to him that if he caused trouble here, then the guards would not let him enter the castle. Upon hearing this, Other's hand began to tremble. Then Aang stared into his eyes and with a smile advised him to think a little more before acting in this way. Instead of listening to him, Other became even more furious and started activating the core to attack him as well. Upon realizing this, Aang also activated his core and prepared to fight. But at that moment, someone approached him and addressed him as young Master Other. Upon hearing this voice, he began to feel immense pressure. This voice belonged to his elite guard, while his body emitted a sinister aura. He looked at him with a murderous gaze and explained that Aang was right because the warriors coming here were worthy warriors with considerable strength. And he also added that it wouldn't be well received if they ended up having a bad reputation at the moment they had arrived here. He grabbed him by the shoulder, slightly crouched down, and while staring directly into his eyes, he told him that if he really wanted to teach Aang a lesson, then he didn't have to do it now, and neither did he have to do it here. He also added that the most important thing for them now was to enter the castle since anything could happen inside the castle. He started staring menacingly at Aang and with an eerie aura asked Other if he understood what he meant. Upon hearing this, he smiled and realized what the elite warrior had in mind. He deactivated his core, and upon seeing this, Aang let go of his hand and Other explained to him that he would no longer bother arguing with losers. Then he began walking in the opposite direction from them and gave the order for his elite warrior and healer to return. Slowly, the three of them started walking. Several seconds later, the elite warrior passed by Aang's side and they stared into each other's eyes. Aang didn't take long to realize what was happening. The elite warrior stomped heavily on the ground and activated the elemental energy of earth, causing the small stones on the floor to slowly float. He took another step and the stones started moving quickly towards Aang's head. Instead of dodging the attack from the elite warrior, Aang simply closed his eyes and in a blink of an eye, he caught all the stones in his palm. Upon hearing the sound of the stones, Sidu Liu looked behind him and asked what was going on. Aang smiled and reassured her not to worry as they were just some small mosquitoes. Little by little, he began to lower his arm and while the palm of his hand was glowing, he looked directly into her eyes and explained that the most important thing now was to go take the test because he was sure they would be able to pass without any problems. He started opening the palm of his hand, letting the stones fall. He had activated the elemental ability of metal called Hardened Skin, and for this reason, he had been able to catch the stones with his hand without getting hurt. The elite warrior moved away from them a bit and slightly turned his head. While looking at Aang with a murderous gaze, he began to wonder if he had secretly used his hand to counteract his earth element attack. He was amazed to see that his reaction speed was insane. He also began to wonder why his hand hadn't been pierced immediately when he had catched the stones. He approached Other and got his attention. He turned around and asked him what he wanted. He approached and while looking into his eyes, advised him to make changes in the list of potential competitors for the integration core. He revealed to him that Aang was the opponent who represented the greatest threat to them, and also added that he was beyond the strength of the quadruple fin. While staring at the ground, he explained that he had been unable to measure Aang's true strength. Upon hearing this, Other was dumbfounded. The elite warrior stood up and while staring into his eyes, advised him to find an opportunity to kill both of them, as this way they could prevent them from becoming stronger. Several minutes later, Aang and Sidu Liu arrived at the entrance of the castle. A woman checked their synchronization rates. Aang's synchronization rate was 54%. And Sidu Liu's synchronization rate was 42%. Sidu Liu looked at Aang and thought that at this level there was no level restriction, so she asked him if they had passed the synchronization rate test. Just before he could respond, the woman who was at the entrance caught their attention. Sidu Liu ignored her and thought that Aang's synchronization rate was originally 39% the last time they tested it. She realized that not only had he raised his level to a one-fin warrior, but he had also increased his synchronization rate to 42%, which was a huge improvement. The woman caught their attention again and while she was looking at the tablet, she noticed that the two of them were a quadruple fin warrior and a single fin warrior with a green core. She asked them if they really wanted to enter the castle to fight for the integration core. She revealed to them that the lowest ranking demon inside the castle was a triple fin demon. She looked directly into their eyes and asked if they were sure. Aang replied yes, as they were strong enough to protect themselves. Then he reached out his hand towards Sidu Liu and explained that she was the healer of the team, and an extremely agile warrior. Upon hearing this, Sidu Liu closed her eyes and turned her head to the side, thinking that this was exasperating as she had been reduced to a healer. The woman explained to them that there had never been a warrior lower than a quintuple fin warrior who had entered the castle. She also added that although they didn't have level restrictions, the equipment they were wearing was the lowest level equipment in history to have entered the castle. She warned them that the integration core could only be found within the castle's unique integration core demon. These demons only appeared once every certain period of time, and once the demon died, it took quite some time for another one to appear. She revealed to them that they were not only going to have to fight against the demon, but they were also going to have to face many strong warrior contenders. She told them that just surviving was going to be a huge challenge for both of them, so she asked them again if they wanted to enter the castle. Aang looked at her eyes intently and replied yes, since their goal was not only to survive. He also thanked her for the warning. Upon hearing this, she extended her hand towards the door and asked them to come in. Sidu Liu sighed and then, while staring fixedly at the castle door, thought that she should be afraid of this terrifyingly dangerous place. But instead, she felt strangely calm and confident, as if with Aang just being there, she would have an infinite amount of courage. The castle door opened and both began to slowly move towards the interior of the castle. Several minutes later, Sidu Liu and Aang entered the castle and reached the cemetery of Dagora Castle, which was a deserted place that had been completely devastated by demons. At the same time, while several demons were conversing among themselves, Sidu Liu and Aang took advantage of the distracted demons and hid behind the remains of destroyed buildings. Sidu Liu looked towards the demons and explained to him that this place had been completely invaded by demons, while Aang was spying on the demons from a corner. He nodded his head, indicating to her that it was correct. He looked at her intently in the eyes and explained to her that there was a reason why the Dagora Castle was called a castle despite being only a city. He asked her if she knew that the Dagora Castle had once been a place that rivaled the City of Dawn, because it was located in the middle of the country. In the past, Dagora used to be a bustling city, but due to demonic invasion, it slowly began to descend into ruin, until eventually it turned into a battlefield. And after this, the ancient castle of the city, which acted as the central point of the entire continent, was taken over by demons, so no human dared to continue living in Dagora Castle. While Aang was staring at the ground with a sad look, he explained to her that humanity had started calling this city castle so that people could forget about the city's past glory. Sidu Liu was somewhat surprised, and while leaning on the remains of the wall, she looked at Aang and asked him how he had learned so much about this place. He sat on the ground, extended his hand, and explained to her that this was not something he had learned, but only stories he had heard when he was little. Upon hearing this, Sidu Liu got angry and thought Aang was arrogant. While leaning against the wall, slowly he began to stand up and ordered her to move forward since they needed to find the unique demon that had the integration core. He wanted to preserve their energies now and avoid unnecessary conflicts. While Aang was talking, she looked aside and noticed something happening. Not far from where they were, there was a big explosion. Upon seeing this, she told Aang that there was a fierce battle nearby. She noticed that several warriors were fighting against the demons, so she asked him if they should go help the warriors defeat the demons. While Aang was getting up, he replied that no, it wasn't necessary for them to help the other warriors who were inside the castle. He explained to her that now that they were inside the castle, they shouldn't lend a hand to anyone. After saying this, Aang sighed, closed his eyes, and thought to himself that Sidu Liu had not lived in the city of Helios since she was young. He believed that for this reason she remained so compassionate, and had no idea how evil humans could be in this world. He asked her if she truly believed that the kind of people they had encountered at the castle entrance were good people. He revealed to her that inside the castle there were many more selfish and unbearable warriors. He looked into her eyes and with a pleasant smile explained to her that just to be cautious, they couldn't lend a hand to anyone. At that moment, Aang's expression changed drastically as he couldn't believe what was in front of his eyes. While they had been distracted, a blue core demon took advantage of this moment and approached them. The demon activated the blue core and with an evil smile, extended its claw and prepared to attack Sidu Liu, who hadn't even noticed its presence. Using all its strength, the demon struck where she was standing. Its strike was so powerful that it even shattered the entire floor. But luckily, just before the demon could attack Sidu Liu, Aang activated his core and in the blink of an eye saved her and moved several meters away from the demon. She didn't know what had happened as this had occurred in a matter of milliseconds. Once she opened her eyes, she saw Aang carrying her in his arms. Upon seeing this, she was shocked and began to wonder what had just happened. Aang started to crouch down on the ground to let her stand on her own. She looked back and saw the blue core demon staring at them intently. The demon began to wonder what had just happened. This demon was of the water element and was a quintuple blue core demon. The demon began to stare at Aang and couldn't help but smile when he realized that he had been able to react to his attack. He explained to Aang that its elemental water attack was soundless and difficult to detect, so it shouldn't have been possible for a human to react to an attack from a demon like him. Once he left Sidu Liu on the ground, she started activating her green core. Aang slightly turned his head back, and while staring at the quintuple fin demon, he began wondering how it had appeared behind them. He didn't take long to realize that the demon had used the water element to remain in a silent and liquid state, taking advantage of the agility of water to approach them stealthily. While Sidu Liu was staring at the blue core demon, she thought to herself that if Aang hadn't noticed its attack in time, she would already be dead. Both began to stare at the demon with a murderous look, and Aang explained to her that they needed to finish this battle as soon as possible so as not to attract the attention of other demons in the area, as well as the attention of other warrior teams. Aang drew his sword and, while holding it with one hand, stared fixedly at the blue core demon and asked Sidu Liu to go all out as they needed to quickly defeat the demon. Upon hearing this, she assumed an offensive stance. She thought to herself that she could no longer be careless, as she couldn't continue being a burden to him. The blue core demon began approaching them and with a smile asked if they really believed they could easily defeat him. He also noticed that Aang was a quadruple fin warrior, and Sidu Liu was a single fin warrior. The demon mocked them, asking if they were really underestimating him in this way. In the blink of an eye, the demon activated the blue core and disappeared in front of their eyes. In an instant, he appeared above them and started laughing to get their attention. Aang quickly looked up and upon seeing the demon above them, realized they were in danger. On the other hand, Sidu Liu wasn't even able to sense the presence of the demon. The demon began to fly in the air, extending both hands to the sides and activating the water element, causing the water around its body to take the form of icicles. The demon activated its ability called the Rain Waltz, causing more icicles made of water to appear around its body. Aang and Sidu Liu looked up and quickly realized what was about to happen. The demon pointed both hands towards the ground, causing the water icicles to slowly advance towards them. Little by little, the icicles of water began to fall to the ground, and upon seeing this, Aang activated the core and asked Sidu Liu to come towards him as he realized that the demon's attack was an area attack. Without thinking twice, she obeyed him and started moving towards him. At that moment, the icicles of water controlled by the blue core demon began to impact against the ground, destroying everything in their path. Just before the demon's attacks could reach near where they were, Aang plunged his sword into the ground and activated the earth element, causing several branches to emerge from the ground and form a dome around them. Upon seeing that the water icicles were destroying everything, the blue core demon couldn't help but smile at the thought that a warrior with a quadruple fin core and another warrior with a single fin were nothing more than trash compared to a demon like him. With a smirk, he mocked them, saying that he wouldn't even spare a glance at their corpses. Several seconds later, the demon began descending towards the ground, and once he reached it, he noticed there was a dome in the area where Aang and Sidu Liu were. Upon closer inspection, he saw that this dome was made of wood and metal. It didn't take him long to realize it was elemental energy. The demon stood up and while staring fixedly at the dome made by Aang, he was left speechless and began to wonder what was happening. At that moment, Aang stared intensely at the demon with a penetrating gaze and started pulling the sword out of the ground, causing the branches to slowly move apart and create an entrance in the dome. The demon became somewhat confused upon seeing this and began to wonder how Aang could use two different types of elemental energy. If only human warriors from quintuple fins were able to use elements. While the demon was lost in his thoughts, Aang gathered momentum and began to advance quickly towards him with the intention of finishing him off as quickly as possible. With one hand grabbing the sword, he started to aggressively stare at the demon. Upon realizing Aang's intentions, the demon decided not to stand idly by and stomped heavily on the ground, causing icicles of water to emerge from the ground and block Aang's path. Seeing this, he smiled and while staring directly at the demon, told him that he could also use the water element. He activated the water element, causing his body to transform into water, and thanks to this, he was able to dodge the icicles created by the demon in the blink of an eye. The demon, upon seeing Aang's speed, realized that it was very fast. In an instant, Aang appeared in front of the demon, who was left speechless. While holding the sword with his right hand, he prepared to attack and asked if he was surprised. Instead of trying to dodge the attack, the demon simply stood still, and while staring into Aang's eyes, smiled and told him that this was no big deal and that a human who could use the water element would never be able to keep up with the agility and water element of a demon like him. Aang shouted Sidu Liu's name, and at that moment, she appeared behind the demon and placed both legs on his back. Seeing this, the demon became confused and started wondering what was happening, and when she had appeared behind him, Sidu Liu activated her core, gaining momentum as she struck the demon's back with both legs. This caused him to lose balance and start moving towards Aang. He didn't waste another second. While holding the sword with both hands, he gained momentum and began to advance quickly towards the demon. The demon tried to defend himself, but just before he could make a move, Aang pierced its chest with the sword, ending its life. Then he raised the sword up along with the demon's body, causing the blue core to appear at the tip of the sword. While looking down at the floor, he praised Sidu Liu for having done a good job. She landed on the demon's back, and while staring at the blue core, she toasted with it for future fights. Upon hearing this, Aang simply smiled as he stared into her eyes. She reached out her hand, and while grabbing the demon's blue quintuple fin core, she told him that as a one-fin warrior, she would accept this gift with gratitude. While holding the blue quintuple fin core in her hand, she looked straight at Aang and told him that she would be attentive to compliment his actions in the future. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.